So hi everyone, this meeting is being recorded. It's going to be posted online. Participation in the meeting is in accordance with the LF antitrust policy as well as the Open SSF Code of Conduct. And yeah, I think we have Deanne. Looks like you have Trustify updates. I think that who was it Ruben that wanted to talk about the software identifier stuff? Unfortunately, he's not here today. So
Let me see if I can pin him, but yeah, if he didn't show up, he probably.
yeah, I mean it's fine. I think we can set up some other time if needed.
I can reach out to him. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we'll set it sometime. Don't worry about it. I guess I would be interested to hear Santiago what's going on. And any updates also.
So Robin is joining. Yeah, he
Oh,
thought it
everyone
was
joining.
cancelled. I guess Ben didn't post the message to the Slack.
Oh,
That's the usual
that's a usual
sign
reminder.
that we are.
Well, and the last message I think on Slack is canceling the one for last
Yeah,
week. So I
yeah,
guess
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
if you don't look at the dates, you're like, oh, it's canceled.
All right. Let's maybe Dayan, do you want to start with the Trustify updates?
Yeah, I can do it just quickly. So I did basically last week set up our governments a little bit better. So the governments should be now up to date with the real world. Page and that was approved by Ben and merged. So I basically created three teams for Trustify. First one are maintainers who has the admin rights on our repos. The other are contributors, much wider batch of folks who have uh, right privileges to like create PR and things like that. And we have a triage for our managers and folks who are basically just managing PRs issues and dashboards. We also have like two exceptions, Ruben being one, is that Ruben is the main guy behind the dependency analytics. So he has like a maintain privileges on that, and Carlos, the main guy behind the UI, is has the maintain privileges on UI. I think we'll change that. I just put it so that we can like continue working. It works. It looks decent for now, and we'll see how to go forward.
Gotcha.
One more thing is that I allowed actions to actually create PRs on the organization level. That's the thing we needed for the release process for our Java stuff. And I wanted just to mention it here to see if that's okay with everybody. If not, to see if we need to find a different way. Let me.
This is just creating the PRs, right? Not writing to off level.
Yes. So this is how our. So one more thing that we did, we created a GUAC namespace in Maven central repo because yeah, we want to do it under this new new organization, and yeah, we have this Java component.
Who is like which how is that namespace managed? Like is
So
there like a owner for?
so now the GUAC, we what we did is that we created a temporary project in the organization as part of the verification process with the Maven Central. And now it's like verified that GUAC organization is the owner of that Maven namespace.
Okay, awesome.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
So I think now, Robin, correct me. Now we have like a first release of our Java library in the Maven repo. If you have a link, even better.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the publishing. It's automating in GitHub all of the release process for publishing for npm and Maven. It's something that I always have to relearn, and it's constantly failing. So I'll get there, and I'll share the link.
Work in progress, yeah.
Awesome. I mean, this is nice integration, right? So you don't have to manage any other accounts outside.
Yeah, because in the previous version, we were publishing to the GitHub packages for npm and Maven, but I think it's more appropriate to use Maven Central and the npm registry.
I guess coming back to the point, privileges of creating PRs on all level. I think that sounds okay. In the worst case, if the bot goes wild, we close out all the PRs and we start giving them permission for a while. But it sounds like what is the scope of that bot doing? Is it
I'll show you an example.
okay?
I'll try to find the link to the config change so that we, it's easy to revert if you need it. But basically, it needs to be allowed both on the organization level and on the project level, on the repository level, so for it to work.
Yeah. Okay. I think the permission should be fine. I'm just more curious on like whether the bot is going to actively file PRs on other things.
So it basically just pumps the version, one patch version, and creates the PR.
Okay.
But in our case, sorry, in our case, it also has to update the documentation. So that's why it updates the files.
Okay, awesome. But it's a bot is configured to scope just for the project, right? Okay, perfect. Sounds good. I'm excited to see the Maven packages.
It's enabled here. Just for
Okay.
just at the bottom of the page.
Okay, I'll put that in the notes as well in case you have to look back on that. I see. Okay.
Sorry for the dumb question. I'm always confused because I release a Maven package every other year, but is the suffix, the snapshot, is that something that's supposed to be handled by the publishing infrastructure, like to remove it? Or I just remember that OSSRH will act differently if that thing is in there.
For the snapshots, we are publishing the snapshot version to a different repository, to a different path.
Okay.
But when we do the release workflow, it will create a tag without the snapshot. We'll publish it, and then we'll create a new pull request with the next version snapshot.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. Yeah, and not that I know a lot about it. I just every time I do it, I'm always confused as to what are the consequences of having that in there.
Sure.
Awesome.
Do we
Cool.
have a link to this new namespace? It is created, right?
Yeah. I don't know how to share the URL of the namespace because I still have only deployed snapshots.
Never mind. We can do it next time. Yeah.
Cool.
So next thing is we had a minor release of Trustify. So I'm not sure. I think this is a question for Jens as well. Like I think we should like maybe create a small message to the Slack with the new releases, if that's okay with everybody, just to keep people in the loop with the things that are going on. So I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe we can do something like that tomorrow, just like a couple of notes of what's the most important thing there. And on that topic as well, so I try to push people more to contribute to the Slack, to like have an activity there. Someone mentioned that we should do like a webinar with OpenSSF, and I think
What?
I'm a webinar.
Oh yes.
And I think I'm finally ready to commit to that. So my plan is to like we need to do much more onboarding, getting started documentation, so that we talk when people come and see they can try things and things like that. But I think like having a deadline and we have set the deadline for the webinar will be a good thing to keep me in check for that. Yes.
Yeah, actually, it might be quite cool because I submitted a talk for the CSAF community day or days here close to Munich, and that talk got accepted. And part of the talk is about the Trustify thing, the idea of bringing SBOMs and advisories together. And maybe we can keep it easy and share a little bit of the slides. So that will be cool, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know if Ben or so do you know who's the good contact to start talking about it and see how to?
I think Ben would
Okay.
be a best bet. He's been doing a lot of the talking to OpenSSF side.
Cool. So I'll ping him and see like yeah. And then we can work on slides, work on getting started docs and things like that, so that we can share things a little bit.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Yeah, and to send those slides. I'm kind of curious. I've been doing a lot of Vex stuff also, so I'm very curious at what's going on there. All right, so I think that's any more topics. I think we covered most of them for the Trustify site. Okay. Santiago, do you wanna tell us what you've been cooking?
Yeah. I'll give an update. I'll also start from the very top because I think the conversation has been going on for a while and shifting a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'll ask in a minute what is the sort of the perspective that you are coming from, Ruben. But primarily, what we are concerned with is there's the identifier itself and the artifact that it's representing. And there are two phenomena when you look at the data sets in the wild, that you have either an identifier that's pointing to two different artifact instances, and you don't have enough information in the identifier to disambiguate. It's like a type 1 error style thing. And then you have the opposite case where you have two identifiers that are pointing to the same thing, which is that comes in a bunch of different families of problems. So for example, there's the benign case. For example, say a container was in Docker Hub, and then it was transferred to like a local GCR sort of like instance. It's the same container. It just has two different sort of like pearls to talk to about the same container. That is okay, and we would like to reason about what does that mean, right? Then you have the other case, for example, when you run two different static analysis tools, and this is something that we've been trying to test at scale, that they produce opinionated pearls. For example, I think it was Trivi, when you run it over Red Hat packages, it will include the distro, I think, sort of like fragment on the Perl, which is not like by standard the way to refer to Red Hat stuff like packages. Of course, other tools will not include it, which means that now you have two identifiers that effectively tell you the same artifact or a different artifact, quote unquote, in a way that it's actually information free. You're just adding like noise to the graph. So what we have been doing is, well, you have this sort of like the obvious approach where you effectively go and tell Trivi, hey, you're producing wrong Red Hat identifiers, which is a problem. But that also means that us as a community would need to be chasing around every single tool that's producing identifiers. And not only that, it really does require us to be looking at every single tool that produces identifiers and then comparing to sort of like a gold standard. So we need to do this at scale. The approach that we were taking so far is actually very straightforward, which is effectively differential analysis on all of the tools that we can get over a wide array of data sets. So we took a bunch of, and this is, I can talk about why, but we took a bunch of like federal government repositories, and then we run every single SBOM generation tool that we can on them. And one of the nice effects of them is that, for example, they have Node.js, Red Hat, Debian, a bunch of different ecosystems, and a lot of the times it's also mixed, right? They have a container that pulls in Node packages, it pulls Debian packages, it shadows one package with another package, stuff of that nature. And then we effectively say, okay, these two tools generated two identifiers, they disagree about what the identifier for this artifact was. What can we do about it? Like, can we automatically tell what is wrong with them? For example, if I just explode the Perl into fragments, can I then do a diff and find that it's just a superset of the other one? Or if I do it and it's like completely different, then I may need to like further like investigate what is going on. So the cases that I told you in the beginning, or I told you guys in the beginning, which is like you have 2 to 1, 1 to 2, benign, non-benign, and whatnot. These are things that we're trying to like bucket automatically in this case, because we need to address them in different ways. On the longer term, what we're trying to also build is if we think about this pipeline as something that GUAC can do semi-automatically, both at a sort of heuristic level, as in like, oh, I've seen this Perl, it has this dist fragment, it's a Red Hat package. I know what it should be pointing to. It should be pointing to the normal canonical Red Hat Perl. So I will just remove this and make an entry that says, I observed this at this point, there's an equivalent class here. The second one is we can do more sort of like advanced graph structural work, and that's something that we so far we have only toyed with. Unfortunately, I also had a little bit of a student churn in this last couple of months, so I haven't had a student that can fully pick it up. But that's effectively where I want to get to in the sort of like near term. Hopefully by the end of the year we can start having more. This is to say that right now what we really have is a pipeline that generates a bunch of different identifiers, finds equivalent classes between the identifiers, and then it produces a bunch of heuristics, or at least a marker saying this tool generates identifiers that are wrong, or wrong, quote unquote, right? You have to manually figure out which one of the ones was right? You need to go to the spec and check the Perl and yada, yada, yada. Is that the conversation we wanted to have, or is this wanted to have something a little bit more specific? I looked at the meeting minutes and I couldn't find a lot of information about which part of the identifier. Granted, it's been a couple of months by now since the conversation happened. So,
no, from my side, the interest was mostly curiosity of because Brandon mentioned you when I asked about how to see if two or more SBOMs were equivalent or similar, regardless of all the metadata and identifiers that and relationships.
Yeah, so that is another thing that I mean that layers on top as well when you're trying to understand SBOM differences. So what we implemented, albeit I would say it was not very good code, so I think we're going to have to re-implement it. Is we decompose an SBOM into a tree. You can imagine an SBOM as a tree that has two types of nodes. It's either a claim node, which will never nest. For example, it could be a license, right? So it's attaching to the parent and it just claims that this is the license that affects the parent, right? And then you have the dependency nodes, which are effectively nested, right? You can have the transitive dependencies and so on and so forth. There is a family of algorithms called a tree edit distance algorithms. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're basically the same for a string. But if you give it to trees, it tells you this is how far, or the changes that you would have to do to this tree to generate this other tree. So in our case, we effectively decompose the SBOM into two trees, which is it just literally generated a tree out of GUAC graphs. And then give this to this tree edit distance algorithm. Now, the way that this edit distance algorithm works, and this is why it connects to the identifier question, is when it compares two nodes to check if they're the same, it's a semantic comparison over the node. So you have a distance function over the node contents, because you need to find the node that's the closest to each other node in order to build the structural comparison. I don't know if I'm starting to sound a little bit too weird.
No, so far so good.
Okay, cool.
Around this, if you talk about the licenses, but does that case also include where, because I've seen SBOMs that are like product SBOMs and they reference, for example, container images, and this container image goes one level up saying which repository this comes from. Would that be equivalent to the license example that you mentioned? Because those are like nodes on top of that. No other node depends on it, but they are like pointing to like, you know, so the product and the repository points to this container image. So there are two nodes. It's that will break like the tree structure, I guess.
Oh, you mean because you're strictly it's on a tree strictly, now it's a graph of sorts, like it has multiple parents?
I'm kind of curious about this. Are you talking about the Red Hat product? I think there's the identifier tree, right? I think like in CSEF there is like a notion of a product hierarchy. Are you talking about that or something different?
Yeah, because you have like the product SBOM, and this product SBOM includes several container images, and these container images have dependencies and dependencies. But the container images have a generated from or some kind of relationship like this that are like going one level up, in my opinion, because you can consider it as one level down, but depends on how you consider it. But
so for this example, I don't know if it is a problem, because at the end of the day, we still need to reconstruct a tree. There is a more heavy set algorithm that's graph edit distance that will assume that there's cycles and stuff like this. But that usually is more costly. In practice, maybe I'm being too academic, but usually if you're running to a tree that's too complicated, it's basically subgraph isomorphism. You can just splice it and then compare individual graphs. And since we have enough semantic information, we kind of know. We can say, hey, this is a Red Hat product that has a bunch of trees inside of it. So I can just iterate over the first children of the product and do the comparison at that level. And then compare the Red Hat products if I want to. Does this make sense?
Yeah. I'll get slower then.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good if we actually threw this at the and see if it works or it doesn't work. Something that at this point the part that we're building too is all of these distance functions on a per node semantic are tight, right? You can only compare dependencies using this sort of like identifier diffing algorithm, right? You can only compare licenses using something that's aware of license semantics, right? It's different to say that a project moved from Apache 2 to GPL3 than something that moved from GPL2 to GPL3. So that is the node semantics, and then you have all of these distance functions, and then you have the structural differences that allow you to say, for example, oh, this dependency that was transitive now it's a direct dependency, which from what I've been asking around, it's a feature that's very interesting for like compliance teams to say, well, now you pull this dependency, now you're pulling it directly. Do we need to vendor it, or do we need to use the one that's blessed in our organization, right? I'm not comfortable saying which company I was talking to, but effectively they have this process that is, if you're using dependency X, we need you to not use the one that's provided by the ecosystem, but the one that we pulled in, because we're kind of like freezing it to this version. This is the one that was blessed by our teams. If it's pulled by as a transitive dependency, that bothers us. But if you pull it as a direct dependency, that's a definitely no, right? So we can produce this from the structural elements of the diffing. Just to say that comparing to the two SBOMs this way is cool, and there's some code on the GUAC analyze, like pull request, but I would say that it's not code that I would like to show to my mom to have her post on the fridge or anything like that. It's really rough, and yeah, I think I would probably be happier refactoring that part of the approach.
I'm kind of curious. Do you have an example of the product SBOM to share? Because I feel like we've only been looking at open source SBOMs, but it'd be really helpful to also look at product ones.
Yeah, I think that would be super useful because for all of this differential analysis and stuff like that, we really just need data. At the end of the day, since we're comparing data with other data that we don't know if it's right, the only thing that we can really do is discrepancies.
I think it'd be super nice if we have like all the SBOMs today look different. Like it's like an SBOM normalization that we can run. It makes them all look the same.
I think at some point we may want to release a data set saying like, here's all of the SBOMs that are generated in the world and some sort of a label that's telling you what is the difference between them. And I wonder if...
I thought Interlink had a bunch of SBOM. Path was looking at it, I think.
So there's a bunch of SBOM data sets, but they don't have a lot of sort of labels that allow you to know what are you looking at. So it's for example, same SBOM or same artifact, 5 different SBOM generators and stuff like that. And those are ones that we have been like hunting for. But figuring out, for example, the only difference between all of these is that they have this this identifier that has an extra fragment, or because that's another thing that we found. There's a bunch of SBOM tools that produce like 5 megabyte SBOMs. Once that for the same artifact, you get another tool that does like a 2 kilobyte SBOM, right? And that's very hard to to work with. So this is a product.
I'm not sure. So I know we had something with dealing with the external references between the SBOMs for some part of the API. Jens, maybe you get that. You could remember that better, but we can definitely. This is the first one I found in our tests for that kind of feature. But maybe let's take a look, and maybe we can find some good examples of that. Or
I didn't know about this SBOM dataset from Red Hat too. I'm gonna play with it too. I wonder.
So in Trustify etc folder, there's a bunch of different stuff. So there are a couple of data sets and the test data for different use cases we try to cover. Just trying to think how we can maybe present all these different kind of things that we were working on. So yeah, let's think about it. I don't have an answer now, but we can come back to that at some point. So these external references and cyclic dependencies, I know they came up at some point as the issue that have been solved.
Yeah, that's something that, for example, we found very confusing. A bunch of tools just give you a hash prefix there. They just don't care to look for it later. So when we were running this, I think it was SIFT on all of these like government repositories, something like 80% of the dependencies were basically just a hash of some random manifest. But they were not private code. They were like open source. They just kind of gave up on this external ref stuff. So I don't know. That's another thing that I would like to also have a better understanding. But certainly this data is useful.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at this, right? And then, sorry, Ruben, go ahead. I didn't see your hand.
I just wanted to add on top of this. Those are the SBOMs I was working on before working on dependency analytics. So the OpenShift repository SBOMs are the ones I've been looking more, and they are very interesting because the way they are generated, they also this reference on the where this container was generated from. It points directly to the Git commit. So it has the metadata from the repository where it was generated, and the Git commit it was used for. So I think this is very important data when you want to work on SBOMs, because it will also help you not only rely on the package URL, but also on some additional metadata that will help you identify the uniqueness of two different components, this use case that you were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah, I need to take a look at this data. I think it's going to be useful, and I'll certainly poke you if I have
Yeah, definitely.
like
So you have
questions.
both SPDX and CycloneDX examples there. So give it a look here and let us know.
I think those are mainly SPDX in this repository. Well, in this folder, I mean.
Here's some CycloneDX as well, I think.
So a question that we haven't tested this, but but something I wonder is, have you seen any sort of like information loss between formats? Because I would like to test this at scale and automatically.
Do you mean converting between formats, or just like different production of same tool producing different formats?
Same tool. So like I give you the artifact, I run the two generators, I give it my format, CycloneDX minus format, SPDX.
Yeah, SIFT. The tool I used to use, SIFT, was giving me useless, non-compiling SPDX, but the CycloneDX was like better in my opinion with more useful data.
I wonder if we could also test this at scale, like automatically. I mean, I haven't worked on that part at all, but I think that would be interesting to know as well.
I think this is an interesting topic, and there's kind of a CRA working group, OpenSSF CRA working group that I'm participating in, and this has come out of like the SBOM accuracy and completeness. And I think that is one of the things that we talked about was having, you know, potentially a test suite or something. So I think if there's anything interesting here, I think we could present that to that community and get some feedback or see whether there's interest in OpenSSF doing some, you know, investing in that.
Yeah, I think we'll find something. Again, part of my hope is to also have this as a sort of a continuous testing. So kind of like a reproducible builds has this stress tester. If we have a good way, I mean, it's the same as reproducible builds, right? Without diffoscope, reproducible builds is not very useful. But if we made like a SBOMoscope, then all of these things will be very interesting. And probably we'll give guidance to tool developers and yeah, and pretty much set up us for like having good heuristics on the identifier libraries.
Do you imagine something like that being like, here are a couple of like tool chains, like here's a couple of example software supply chains, right? Then you have like, you build Java, you use a Scratch container, and then you copy it into it. And then, you know, one tool, maybe you run Sift on the output, one tool, maybe you run Trivia on the output, but then another tool, maybe like you run the Maven SPDX plugin, and then I don't know, you do something else, right? And then we have like some kind of scoring mechanism in there.
Yeah, that's what I was imagining. That we would have like every single possible SVM generator in a random pipeline. And hell, part of what I wanted to do is I already run a rebuilder on my lab for like Debian. So I could just start producing SBOMs with every single tool on every Debian package that gets built. And it would be more, I can imagine somebody saying, hey, I want my tool to be scored. Here's a pull request with a sort of like command line argument and the stage that you need to run it in. And then I guess the scoring would be effectively how far it is from other tools, which that doesn't give us directions. It only gives us distance, but I think that's a good start.
Have you spoken with Matt and Willem recently from OSS Rebuilt?
Recently, no. I've been literally under a rock for a month or so. But I recall talking with them about yeah, pretty much how to connect OSS Rebuild with Rebuilder D, which is what I use, and yeah, I should touch base with them.
Yeah, I think that they were interested in the SBOM, a little bit on the SBOM side as well.
I'll shoot them a message.
Yeah, I think one of the things I noticed looking at this SBOM, right? I think the Trustify one, it kind of one of the use cases that you brought up, Santiago, came out where like, oh yeah, we had this package URL with a bunch of repository IDs, right? Where those are kind of like additional metadata on top of it. and that could be like, oh, the real identifier one is just the version, and then you have like potential different repositories you can get it from. I am kind of curious about how this SBOM was created, in the sense of how was the resolution for repository IDs, right? Because in my mind, when I create something, it's using one repository, and it's getting the data for that one. I guess in this case, I guess in this case, it's that these are all different architectures, and therefore, okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's trying to point to every architecture. But for example, something that I would be curious to know, and again, I don't know if there's a better way to do it, but there's actually like the package for the architecture, then there's the debug info, the libraries, and the debug source. And all of those should be clustered together, right? Like I would want to imagine some relationship between the forward tuple of all of these for each individual architecture. I don't know if that's something that needs to be captured in an SBOM, but I would be curious to know if there's a better semantic to express that.
I think this is a question of like the structure also, right? Like it is like, should this be a tree versus
Yeah, I mean, you end up with a funky graph, but I think the semantics here would be interesting. If I were to look at this as a cyclone dx, can I make the same expressions? Or so my understanding is cyclone dx is a little less graphy in a sense. It doesn't allow you to have like arbitrary relationships going back and forth.
I think it's just a tree, right?
Yeah.
I think it's we see this phenomenon elsewhere also. Like, it's like you have a package which is all encompassing, you give it a hash, but somewhere down the road in either another build build step or during consumption time, you're taking that package, you're unzipping it or untiring it, and then using components of it, and therefore we create this like missing link between the whole packages and the sub packages.
So we did this analysis on Maven to just effectively say, okay, does the class files inside of a Maven package, does it all include what's on the sort of like the metadata for the project? And we found that there were a bunch of like random classes that were like injected after the fact, and that's the reason why the hashes don't match as well. So like, for example, we did find a couple of instances where people were just like, oh, this tool is shimming into log4j, but since there's no guarantee that there's log4j somewhere in there, we're just going to inject log4j on this thing. That was one of the discrepancies between SBOM generators. That would be like, oh, let me like systematically analyze every class file and then see if I can match it to the package that came from it. Or do I look at the manifest of the Maven package and then identify all of the classes within it? Which is, that's yet another problem. Like, how do you generate an identifier for that that's actually truthful to what's going on? I think I even have a plot that I can share.
Do you think the omnivore tree structure type thing kind of solves this?
I don't think it is as easy though. because you either retain the structure of the dependency tree, or you make it so that it's easy to update. So to give you an example, in this case that I told you, you have the Maven artifact, right? It has a bunch of classes. And I say, okay, I will hash every class. And to also retain the structure of the classes, I will do like a git commit or git tree style of like, I hash the classes all together, and then that hash plus name, that gives me the parent module, and so on and so forth, right? Now, if somebody goes and says, oh, I will inject a log4j class on this thing, I will effectively have to recompute all of the path between the modules that are in the structure all the way to the root, right? Now this lets me know that it's a different thing. It doesn't let me know why is it different, how different it is, and that they are related whatsoever. Does this make sense?
So you're saying that you can't update the immutable tree because you don't introspect that.
Yeah. So I can't easily update it in such a way that I can do it on the fly. I would have to like recompute the whole path, and I would have to. And if I want to know why it changed, I would have to keep both trees around and be able to navigate it in somewhat of an intelligent way. Which again, it's not impossible, but it's to me it feels like there's probably a better way to do it. Not to say that it doesn't have to use hashes or that it doesn't need to be a Merkle tree. I just suspect that it's probably easier to do it in a different way.
One of the interesting thoughts that we had is we had a similar but different scenario where like we are producing a zip file, someone was unzipping it and then using bits and pieces of it, right? So we didn't have the attestation, so as bombs to kind of have that information. And I had this wild thought where like, oh, what if we went through our entire file system, found every zip, unzipped it, and create provenance for it?
Yep. Yeah. No, so that's also why I think the more provenance attestation approach would allow you to see the differences and the causality between the differences, right? Because you could say, oh, I generated provenance attestation of me unzipping it and adding another file here, and now I know the diff, and I know why it happened, right?
And I imagine like any packaging system like Maven here, you could post run analysis instead of like relying on the runtime to do that for you. Assuming that
Yeah.
everything's in the binary.
Yeah, I remember we had made this weird experiment of changing the sort of like the popen glibc so like wrapper, so that every time you open the process, we would try to wrap it on in toto transparently, and then just put it somewhere in the sort of like file system. And then you should be able to reconstruct whatever happened during the execution of the program. It was not very efficient, but if
Like a
it is
build
at that
graph?
level,
Is it like a build graph or just inputs and outputs?
It puts an output, and it's for anything, right? If you do unzip on the terminal, it puts your say like unzip happened. This is what was opened, and this was what was opened with write, and then I hash it at the end.
By the way, did you paste a spinning wheel in there, or just a file that isn't loading?
I pasted an image. I was expecting it to show up on the other side. I'll put it on the Slack. I just didn't want to just drop something
Okay.
without any
I was
context.
gonna say it would have been really evil. You just paste an image of a spinning wheel.
That's a good idea. I should do it to somebody. It's a very very cool way to troll. I posted it on the Slack now.
Awesome. How effective do you think the in total wrapper would be?
For like the operating system, you mean?
Yeah, like are you just gonna, when you wrap it, will you just like figure out what files it opens and then what
It
files
wasn't hard, honestly. Part of
it
what I was
cache of like
Yeah, so you effectively just because it's almost the same as like Valgrind, right? That you effectively just shim all of the functions that do something. In their case, with memory, you do it for files, and then just on the teardown of the process, then you do the hashing. You can probably do something more intelligent with like UTF and stuff. Uh, Aditya at NYU, no, I think it's at Bloomberg. He did a project called Wavy Builds that was using VPF for that. Part of the goal was to produce attestations sort of like at the millisecond level. So you would end up with like an insanely large attestation, but then you can produce a VSA for that. Which, again, I'm not entirely sure what is the product market fit for this, but it's a cool experiment nevertheless.
All right, we have 2 minutes left. Any other thoughts?
Just so in your conversation, because I got lost at some point, you went from the dependency tree up to the independent difference between the classes that compose each dependency, and also what each class is capable of doing. So opening files and so forth. So wouldn't is it that far that you want to go, or or just knowing that when you build an artifact, a dependency is just different regardless of the transitive dependencies it might have, but the files that were used, so the hash that you generate, or when you sign the artifact, make sure that this was not tampered. It has not been modified to make it like unique.
Yeah, so I think we did derail a bit. So the omnivore approach is, in order to generate a hash for the artifact, instead of just hashing the artifact, you kind of like transitively hash all of the files, kind of like a Git tree hash, right? Now, you're right that in practice, at least for the near term, we would want to just know that the dependency itself has a different hash, and it isn't what you expect, or at least raise some flags in this case, right? I think the interesting bit would be also to be able to say, well, these two are different, and they're different because of this, right? And can we do this in sort of like an intrinsic way that I look at the identifier and probably some associated metadata, and I can say like, oh, it's different because this class was added. So which in theory should like speed up your triage process, because you say like, oh, somebody added log4j on this thing. This is clearly wrong. Does this make sense?
Yeah. Well, maybe the other approach that I mentioned before, where you point directly to the reference where this artifact was generated from, so that if you have two different commits, so to say, you can directly do the diff, and you don't need to go class by class.
Yeah, and I think that will unfortunately be by ecosystem, but we can certainly say this is a good way to do it. But that would probably be the easy way, because then of course you can even compute a diff on the code, and I know exactly what was the difference and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
We are over time, so I just wanna maybe, I think be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you for the good discussion.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
See you around.
See you.